If we were to rewind back a number of years, and Warner Brothers at an earlier time were to announce that The Last of Us was being made as a TV or streaming series adaptation, I would have believed, even amid my very limited knowledge of this property, that this would have been a slam dunk. And that was based on the reception in part of the first game. But times have changed in the years since, and it's in 2023 that the series debuts. It was 2022 when the first trailers came out, and we're about to look at today. I know I'm getting on this late. I apologize for that. I'm in a catch-up mode of a lot of projects. But I find it kind of interesting looking on it now, because again, my perception, I think the perception of many, has become a bit more indifferent to seeing this again in that slam dunk manner. And I did ponder how to approach this video, and part of it's the reason I maybe took so long of it, because I was debating what route to take. Do I want to become more informed, and at this point just watch the game? I wouldn't have had time to play it prior to consulting this today. Maybe I'll play at least the first game in the future. I would consider myself maybe limited to that first game on a general impression, but I'd still be curious. But I decided in the end to give you a fresh take. So I really know nothing, generally, of The Last of Us property, other than it's a zombie story, and there's a family dynamic at the center on behalf of the characters of Joel and Ellie. I think it's Ellie, right? I might have that. Maybe Elle? Is it Elle or Ellie? I don't remember. See, like I said, limited exposure. But I find this a very curious project to consult as a emerging property in a number of respects. Not just on the Last of Us brand. We'll get to that. But I'm curious to see how well the series lands in 2023 in conjunction to all the mix-up it seems is taking place right now. We all knew there would be a lot. But the shake-up amid the Warner Brothers Discovery acquisition. Like many studios, there need to be those sustainable franchises. And Warner Brothers is in a bit of a dicey space, and they've been for a long time. Not by every extent. I think Dune has proven to be pretty good for them, and that one's evolving quite well, at least in some of their, not only the film projects, but in some of the side projects that are in development right now, and some of the stuff within the gaming adaptation space. Dune seems to be taking off. But other larger IPs, let's say, for example, the Fantastic Beasts / Harry Potter storyline, even though I think it's less Harry Potter, like Hogwarts Legacy is like skyrocketing right now, people's perception to it, even though that's for like a number of reasons, I believe, and I think it warrants that success, in my opinion, just based on some of those factors. I won't go on a tangent there. I think it's less the Harry Potter brand. I think it's more so like the Fantastic Beasts, which just proved to be a bit dicey, but I still categorize it as that because it's been a mixed-up space, and we can't necessarily guarantee the full magnitude of success. I would also say The Matrix, for example. I liked the last movie in terms of being a contemplative journey, but I don't think it was perfect, and it's still kind of... The Matrix 4 is to put that IP in the best of spaces. DC as well. DC is all over the place in regard to, you know, anticipation of what it's going to be. We really don't know. At this point, as I'm recording this, James Gunn has taken over. So, I mean, that could be good. It might not prove well. DC might just be a problem generally. I have no idea. You should have stuck with the Snyderverse, admittedly. That would have made everything a whole lot easier. Anywho, I've said that for a long time, but yet, you know, nobody listens to us, apparently. Anyway, Warner Brothers needs successful IPs, especially in the Discovery acquisition days, and I see an emerging brand here with The Last of Us or an attempt to have such a franchise. Do I think it can be that? I honestly don't know. Like I said, if this had been evolved from years ago, I would have said perhaps. But not only is this another video game adaptation, and we know how mixed up that space can be, some projects fare well, yes. Others, definitely not so much. And there's plenty to mention in regards to either mixed or bad quality. There's a lot. You can't guarantee success on that metric alone. But again, the potency of The Last of Us as a brand, given the first iteration, I would think, oh, there's some potential there. Again, if you had asked this of me years back, like, what do you think about the potential success and efficacy of a brand of this being in the live-action adaptation streaming space? I would have been like, heck yeah, that would probably do very well, even again, without any exposure, other than just some of the broad concepts. But I remember the potency. I had a friend, you know, in mind when I remember... I haven't talked to her in a number of years, but she and her, at the time, boyfriend, they're not together anymore, they were both going around to different Comic Cons, at least where I lived, I think a couple other states, that, you know, they were cosplaying as Joel and Ellie all the time. And even though, again, I knew nothing about the property, I knew just from them how, I wish I had pictures to show you, like, their costumes are pretty cool, too. Like, they looked right on point from what I've seen in terms of the game images and with the characters. I know how potent this game was. Everybody talked about The Last of Us. It's gotten rave reviews. People regard it with such a strength. But it's not so much that way anymore in the 2023 year, which is why I say this brand is so curious to look at now, because I do question its longevity, not only as an emerging IP, broadly speaking for the Warner Brothers side, but also on the basis of where The Last of Us has gone as a story. Because while the first game has gotten pretty universal acclaim, I think across the board from all people that I've heard cover it or talk about it, I haven't heard many negative opinions on the first game, to be honest with you, at all. The second game, very different story. And you don't have to, again, be exposed in any way to the specifics of this property to know the animus that drove up. I will never forget the video of I forget who he was, but that young streamer who got to the Abbyzilla beating Joel with with the golf club on the head, killing him. And I remember, what was it with him? Like, I think he said that he looked to Joel as a father figure. I will never forget that image of him splitting the game disc in two. Like, that was a pretty stark signature remark to make, in my opinion. And I know people that liked the second game, so I understand it is a mixed opinion, but I think it's generally erring on the negative. I would say a lot of it has to do, perhaps, with the way it was released. Maybe for a lot of people, they felt the deceitful advertising on part of making it seem like Joel was a prime focus in the game, only to kill him and make it, more like from my understanding, a revenge story, and focus specific attention on other things that really didn't matter or on anybody's list. We're kind of like, what are we watching here? Yes, Abby Smashed comes to mind. I need not show you images of that thing. Anywho, The Last of Us Part 2 divided a lot of people. So I wonder, again, in conjunction to this series, it's not as much I'm looking at this from an interest perspective on the property itself. I'm looking at this from a question of longevity. Because I don't know how this series is going to fare. If it were limited to the first game, which I believe his first season is, and I've heard from some who have seen this series at this point, I've tried to stay away from spoilers the best I can, that I've heard there are some revisions made, so it's not an entirely perfect translation. I think that might ward people off, especially people who are looking for authenticity and adaptation of that first story. But also, this is sort of like the same type of remark we make with, let's say, for example, by comparison to our franchise, Star Wars. People say, all roads lead to the sequel trilogy. All roads lead to The Last of Us Part 2. So, does this series have much life in it? I honestly couldn't tell you. Unless there's some serious revisions made. The general disgust... Oh, I remember what I was going to say as well, in conjunction to The Last of Us 2. The arrival of the whole leak situation, not just, again, the false promises of Joel, but the leaks, the reaction on part of Sony and Naughty Dog, and how they use the copyright system on YouTube. And I remember YouTubers I watch on a regular basis are just talking about the leaks, got some sort of blowback, some pretty severely. It did not have a good arrival. And then when the game debuted, very mixed reception. And to some, like the whole Abby Smash thing, there were laughs to be had, at least a part as well. Like, what am I watching? Anyway, just even as somebody, again, not exposed at all, that was like, what were you thinking? Like, I'm not a player, and that's not what people are asking for. Like, I'm 100% sure of that. Anyway, I think the fun part of this, for me, looking at this series, is not even just maybe the series of focus itself, but the question of longevity. I'm really curious to see if, again, this franchise can be something prominent. I honestly don't know how much life it has. I'd be curious to hear what your opinion is on this as well, going in. If you haven't looked at these trailers yet, this is a fresh perspective. Or maybe you've started watching the series. What do you think on that question? How much life do you think this has a brand in particular? Because, again, The Last of Us Part 2 is, as far as we know, instrumental to the evolution of the story. I think there's a couple points of strength that might bring people in, at least on an initial glance. I think Pedro Pascal is a big draw. And I think, again, knowing how talented he is, not only in the streaming landscape of The Mandalorian, now he's part of two big franchises, but as well, in the films that I've seen him in, he's a very talented actor. I think, for a lot of people, that's an enticing tease. I think the promise of The Last of Us just in the live-action space might bring people in. But as a video game to movie property, as a Warner Brothers property, as an adaptation of a story that's had a very messy run, given its second entry, and maybe amid making certain changes, maybe not making a perfect translation. I don't know how much life this series has. But let's take a look at it from a fresh perspective. That's what I'm giving you today. Starting with, I have 2 trailers pulled up for this, including the main teaser and the first trailer for Season 1. Let's start with the teaser. Best gauge this. I mean, I don't know if I have all my questions answered right now. I'm probing a couple. I think they're worth considering.
The grass in the valley is starting to die, and out in
I like this type of Western doomsday energy.
The darkness is falling, the sky has turned gray, a hound in the distance is starting to fade.
Looks like a streaming show, but it has a good environmental scope. And Chernobyl did get a lot of good regard. I was going to watch this series a while ago, I just haven't yet.
This is your chance. Our best shot. You keep her alive. And you set everything right. Save who you can save.
Oh, please understand.
I like the energy of it, and from what I have heard of the game, it resembles the tone. And I think it's a presentation, though it definitely comes across to me like streaming fare. There's just that, there's a quality in the aesthetic that it doesn't fool me. Like, it doesn't come across to me like a movie. It comes off to me like a TV show. Almost like if it were like a higher budget network program. But again, the acting seems fine. Again, Pedro Pascal is a big draw for a lot of people. Maybe some other cast members in here that you recognize as well that, you like too. Here's another question to consider as well. I mean, zombie fare. There's so much of that these days. So for the general viewer who's, like me, not accustomed to the Last of Us story that closely, how do you feel if you're somebody that likes zombie thriller flicks or shows? I mean, let's say, for example, like The Walking Dead. How many of you feel like lured in to watch this, or is there a feeling of sameness? Because I do sense, even though the look is a bit different, and I like the ticking noises. It comes across to me very similar to other types of flicks. Like, there's just a real feeling of usualness, other than in certain regards. There is a specific quality that singles it out in regard to the presentation of the zombies. I mean, they do look a bit fresh. They're kind of like Resident Evil-esque, in my opinion, from what I've seen of that series. I like the atmosphere, but again, all roads lead to The Last of Us Part 2. So my fundamental question about longevity still stands. Let's consult now the longer of the 2 trailers, and let's get a better taste for the performances. Here we go. Let's take a look at this trailer, because there wasn't much acting there other than just in personality. It was more about like the music and the atmosphere of the series. This should be going in a different direction, I would think.
If you know there is hope for the world, why bother?
No, that's good.
You haven't seen the world, so you don't know. Keep going for family.
I'm not family.
No. Cargo.
Like, way to demote me there. Hey, maybe that's true to the game. I don't know.
Somewhere out west. They work.
But I sense kind of like a begrudging
I think we're really impressed.
father-daughter-esque relationship.
If she so much as twitches, don't.
It's okay.
So that's sort of like the transformation. Gets on Nora, like the limbs start twisting around, and there's like tongue noises and stuff.
I'm taking you with me. Do what I say when I say it.
Good environmental scope. Like, that's
Got any
That's
advice?
great for the
Best
series.
way west?
Yeah, beautiful presentation.
Go east.
Maybe I was unfair to say this has a real streaming aesthetic to it, because I feel a bit different now that I'm seeing this trailer.
You're not gonna scare us.
Scared him?
You have a greater purpose than any of us could have ever imagined.
Be careful who you put your faith in.
You might not be her father, but you were someone's.
You trust me?
In part, it looks typical, and in part of it, it looks strong. So I'm kind of in this space of like, as somebody, like, if I'm looking at this again from a broad lens, because again, I can't closely relate to the story on a knowledge base. While the zombie stuff, again, despite the fresh look to them, feels consistent to other types of entertainment entries I've seen many times, the atmosphere to this series, I think I was a bit unfair to say it looks like a streaming-esque show. Because it's actually quite beautiful. The variety of environments, like this, that hilltop landscape, again, is exquisitely filmed. This area they're walking through with all the floral growth, with the fragmented buildings. Again, I'm assuming most of these are kind of like inspired or maybe directly pulled out of the game. I think it looks great in terms of an atmosphere perspective. And the personalities of the characters. Again, Pedro Pascal. Great draw. Love watching him. I just don't know. Again, I question longevity of this series. Fundamentally, because of the story shifts. And it's not even just, from what I know, which again is it's a rough knowledge. It seems closely linked in part, though I've heard differently. That this does take some fresh detours in part of, again, just some comments out there now that the series has started unrolling itself. It seems to closely follow, at the very least, on the path of the DLC going into The Last of Us Part 2. Like, for example, the shot here of Ellie. Again, I think it's Ellie. And, is that Riley? Is that her name? Oh, no. Again, rough knowledge. I'm digging back in my memory on this one. Forgive me if I'm mixing up a couple things. I didn't see Abby in here at all. Or maybe there was that girl in the first trailer that could have resembled her. I think it was... Was it in the first one? I saw it in passing on IMDb when I was talking about the series in terms of the... Because I pulled up the page for a synopsis, and it was one girl that popped up. I got a quick eye shot of... Or maybe she popped in another ad. I don't know. Anyway, this seems to closely follow in the path of the DLC, which is where I believe some of the consternation originated. And then The Last of Us 2 only made it worse. So I don't know, in terms of an official debut, how this is going to fare. So far, I think it's... I mean, I don't even know. I don't know in terms of a response. Again, I think it's... The fundamental curiosity for me with this series is the question of longevity as a brand. Not only for Warner Bros. In terms of establishing IP, because in terms of what Discovery needs to do in their tenure of the company, Warner Bros. Needs success. They haven't had it with, let's say... Again, Matrix or DC, or to some extent, the Harry Potter / namely Fantastic Beasts franchise. Game of Thrones also came to mind. Even though I think it's recovering a bit, though I'm not a Game of Thrones viewer at all, I know House of the Dragon has given, in some part, a promising restoring grace period to the show, or the property, I guess. But even that is still kind of in a tepid space. And while, again, Warner Bros. Is not, without success. I think Dune is a good example of that. I don't know where The Last of Us fits, to be honest with you. Does it have life maybe in its atmosphere and its visual component to manifesting the game? Perhaps. on a story level, all roads lead to The Last of Us Part 2. Perhaps with some serious revisions. I just don't see how you make that work in terms of providing for a long-sustaining franchise when there's that level of animus surrounding the game. And if you want a faithful adaptation, how are they going to do that? Because, I mean, if they go The Last of Us Part 2, they're going to have to kill Pedro Pascal off. And I think it's going to make a lot of people pretty upset. Especially since he seems to be the primary engagement here on the casting for a lot of people. I mean, again, Joel, from what I know, is a very potent character. Again, I'll never forget that one kid that ripped apart that disc. That was just a strong visual for me. That's etched in my brain how beloved Joel is. And how explainable it was, I think, for a lot of people to justify their growing level of anger when Naughty Dog killed them off, when, as I understand, it was promised otherwise. How are they going to manage to do that? Because the story demands that Joel be killed off eventually by Abby Zilla. And yet you're going to get rid of your lead? It's like the main casting attraction? I don't know how that's going to work. Again, I'm curious not on part of the actual series. I'm more curious about the the show in itself and its placement of an establishing IP. And just on the show and the adaptation space itself. I know it's an unusual angle to take, but I just have so many questions with this series. And time will tell how it results. I think we'll all get to answer some of those questions together. I just find it funny. I don't know what to expect. I have ideas. The series in itself, I mean, everything, again, I think, apart from a beautiful presentation, and I'd be curious, if you want to disclose any of your perspectives down below. I'd love to hear what you think about this, especially if you're somebody who, and I'll open this up to anybody, whether you're a Last of Us aficionado or you're not. If you're like me and you're not engaged at all, how does this appeal to you? Because to me, this series comes across as, in part, typical. And I'm sorry if that offends at all to you Last of Us fans, but I'm watching this going, I just don't see everything. Again, a beautiful atmosphere in the Pedro Pascal casting draw, and I think perhaps some good scripting and some good filming techniques in the overall look of the zombies. It feels really familiar. And while I like slower shows, I sense that, again, with that Western music pick and that energy in terms of the filming style, it's just not that alluring of a watch, to be honest with you, that it's like, oh, I must see this. I'm kind of like, I could or I could not. Especially based on, again, the iffy quality of the property as it stands. That does provide for a lot of the reason, but even just on the series itself, I'm kind of in this mixed space of, in part you're good, and in part you're kind of conventional. I don't know how I feel about this, to be honest with you. Again, I think my curiosity is more so rooted in a fascination on where The Last of Us 2 will, or Last of Us as a property will evolve from here in the live-action space. And that, I think, for me, is going to be the most curious thing to watch. And I would take a gamble that for some of you, you would express the same opinion on that. Thank you so much for watching this video. Before you bounce, feel free to drop a like and comment, subscribe to this channel with a ding on the bell, and share this video with your friends. And consider checking out the description here. There you'll find links to my other channels, as well as addresses to my other social media accounts and ways you can help support my work if you feel so inclined. May God bless you, and looking forward to when our paths cross again.